Welcome. This is going to be about Prime Center, and I will not introduce Prime Center. I will just give the presentation to Michiel from this point on, and I'll try to keep quiet. Michiel, it's all yours.
Yay. Okay. Hello, everyone. Today is about Prime Center. Prime Center is a new Caldera product. I'll first talk about what it's supposed to do, what the application is all about, and then we'll go into the application for a bit, and then I'm going to focus a bit more on the pre-flighting that is included in it, because that is Calas PDF Toolbox, which we all know and love. So Prime Center, to start with, what's it for? Well, it's a pre-flighting, well, it's a pre-press application. It can, it's specifically made for large format. It can import images. You can do pre-flighting on those images. You can manipulate those images in a few different ways. And then you can automatically nest those and gang those together to create a file that is ready for your output device. So it can go, that file can then go straight to the RIP, and after it's ripped, it can be printed. So it's meant to replace the person who opens up the customer's images one by one in Illustrator, looks at what's all wrong with those images, fixes those things manually, then puts them all on a sheet, and then creates a PDF that they would use in production. All of those individual manual steps can be replaced by Prime Center, and Prime Center can do that for you, either also semi-manual or completely automatically. It comes in a few versions. There is a basic, a pro, and a max version. The basic is essentially completely manual, so you would have to load in the files manually, start the processing manually. You don't have to actually do anything. You can just click start. Then you can output the files manually, so you export the PDFs. In the Pro version, the inputting can be automated via a hot folder. And in the Max version, the output can also be automated and to have an exported PDF in a certain folder. It's available for Windows, Mac, and Linux, so it's available for everyone, really. It's notable that even though this is a Caldera product, you can use it separately from Caldera and with any RIP. There is no limitation there. The output from the product is just a ready for production PDF that contains your files, your cut contours, and can be sent to the RIP and be processed. The main feature that Prime Center tries to advertise is the nesting and the ganging that it has. So when you have files, specifically irregularly shaped files that you would see in large format printing, you can nest these together. This keeps into account the irregular shapes, and it does it more efficiently than the Caldera RIP does itself, because it takes into account everything you want to print, and it can nest those things together intelligently. So even though I want to have 3 penguins, in this nest, it says I need 3 copies of a nest that contains 1 big penguin, and I will have 3 penguins. So it's able to think ahead and create files that are useful all the way through there. Then the second thing it does is the ganging. So besides just efficiently using your sheet size, it can also group your files. That's what they call ganging, the grouping of files for one metadata tag. So in this case, I used the customer ID as the grouping tag. And it made me a bunch of nests for customer 1 and a bunch of nests for customer 2. That's what they call ganging, and that's also a big thing in here. Now, I said it's a pre-press thing, and it can change your files a whole bunch. I haven't actually gone to that yet, so that's the next slide. Prime Center itself can do the nesting and the ganging. It can add cut marks for Zund. It can add a trim box rectangularly around your file, because you would work with images in some cases, and these images would not have a trim box or always a cut contour. So you can add a trim box that can then be used to create bleed around or to use as a cut contour. You can add annotations, and you can also mirror images either horizontally or vertically. But besides what Prime Center can do itself, it actually includes PDF Toolbox under the hood. And you can execute a Calas profile on the input of the files, so when your original images come into Prime Center, and also on the output of the file. So when you have your nested document, your big sheet that has all your nested files in there, you can execute a profile on that as well. On the input, we could use this to standardize our files, to fix files if that's necessary, to work with the cut contours, to check for possible problems. And on the output, we can make our export file PDFX compliant, or maybe already do a color conversion if you don't want to do that in your RIP itself. So that actually allows for quite a bit of automated pre-flighting within the application as a whole. And you can also do the normal CALAS reporting on those executions. So you will get a PDF or an XML report if you want that. I added this input slide to the presentation I want to show right now, because this is where you would select your pre-flight profile. So right now it has one of the Caldera Prime Center default included profiles selected, the Basic Science 200 DPI. There are several more. There's a bunch more that are about basic science. These just check the image resolution and whether or not there is a cut contour present in the file. There is also some PDFX verification profiles, which include the checks, and also conversion profiles, which would include the fix-ups to convert to PDFX. So there's not that many options available out of the box, but you can add your own toolbox profiles. So if you have a toolbox desktop and you know what you want to do, you can create your own toolbox profile, add that to the folder, and Prime Center will use that. They are using CALAS PDF Toolbox version 11, so it's the most recent version, and it can do pretty much anything you could do in Toolbox Desktop. So you can do quite a bit here if you know how to work with CALAS. And then this is what the pre-flighting would look like if you do it manually. I have 3 files opened in the application. I just right-click one, select pre-flight, and I get an immediate result whether the pre-flight failed or succeeded based on the checks in the file. And then I can open my report from there. I will show that in the application as well. And then besides the pre-flighting and the nesting, there is also the option to add bleed. And this bleed is actually also a toolbox feature and can do irregular shapes or rectangular shapes with the usual options, which is duplicating or mirroring pixels. So that's essentially all I wanted to show from the presentation itself. The rest of it will be in the application. So I'll quit the presentation here. And I have the application open here. As usual, since this is a cafe, feel free to speak up at any time, ask questions. I'll be happy to answer anything I can answer. So I've spoken about that there is a manual and an automatic way of working with Prime Center. Now in the manual way, you have to load in files by yourself. So what I can do is I can grab some files. I just drag and drop a file into my Files tab. I can do that with another one. So I just grab a file and drop it in there. And immediately we can see that there's a difference between these 2 files. One of these is already clipped around the contour line and the other one is not. That's because we can see it here in the Images tab. The left one has a contour and it's called Cut Contour. The right one doesn't have any contours. This is immediately recognized by the application. Now, something is beeping, it's okay. Now I can pre-flight these files if I want to. So I can go to the Input tab in my recipe. I haven't defined recipes yet. Recipes are essentially profiles. So you define a whole bunch of settings here in the tabs that tell you how your files will be processed. And these recipes can be saved and can then be used separately from each other, all running automatically, or you can use them manually and keep the settings for specific workflows. In my Input tab, like I showed in the slides, I can set a pre-flight profile. And the input profile is right here. This dropdown, all of these files are just present in a folder on the system, which you can access and where you can add your own files to. So in this case, I want to check the cut contour. Of course, in a manual flow, you would already see that this one doesn't have a contour. In an automated flow, you would see it. So you would have to have a check on the inputs that tells you, hey, here's a problem.
So there's a question on that, Michiel. Sorry to interrupt.
There's a question? Okay.
I'm told I could interrupt, so I am. There was a question about cut contours and how Prime Center recognizes the cut contour.
Yeah. So Prime Center will recognize any closed spot color paths as a contour, which would be listed here, but it will only specify a list of names that will automatically select as a cut contour. So I have a file here that has a contour line, which is called cut contour. If I open another file, which has a different contour name, so if I open this one, we can see this one also contains a contour called contour, but that one isn't automatically selected as being a cut contour. This list you can define yourself. If we go to the settings of the application, we have a tab for contours, and any name, spot color name, which is listed here will automatically be seen as a cut contour and be used for the irregular shapes, for the bleed, for everything. So you can add your own names there. These are just the names that Caldera uses by default. So I can still use this contour. If I just select this, you can see it automatically trims the image. So it can use this contour, but it will automatically select it if it is one of files in the list. So this is only usable if it's in a manual flow, or if I add contour to the list. This one will work fine in an automated flow.
And clicking on that checkbox is not automatically going to add it to the list of cut contours, I guess.
No. It's just going to use it for this specific file. It's going to use this line as a cut contour.
Yeah, okay.
So if I now use this pre-flight profile contour checks, which I made, which is just a few different colors checks about spot colors and contour lines, I can right-click this file, select pre-flight, and we will see that this fails the pre-flight. Okay, that's as expected. I can open the report, and we can see in the report, which I have to minimize to be able to drag into the other screen, that this file has no spot colors. Okay, no spot colors means no spot contour. That makes sense. So I can't use that file. Now, if I go back here and I look at this file, I can pre-flight that one as well. Now, it also gives an error. This is not because it doesn't have a contour, but because I also made a check. Wait, that's not right. Is that the wrong report I opened? Yes, it's this one I want to open. So this one says file has no cut contour, which is not the same as file has no spot color. It just doesn't have a spot color called cut contour. So that makes sense. And now I know what the problem there is. This wouldn't be a problem in manual, but in auto, you would want to know that. Then I have one more interesting possibility. That is, I have this file. I'll open it up. We can see it's trimmed automatically around the line. That's because I have a contour, which is called cut contour. Now, if I execute my pre-flight on this file, we will still get an error for it. Why is that? Because I made an extra check, which checks if the cut contour is actually a closed path or not. And in this case, it's not a closed path. Caldera doesn't really seem to care. It trims the box for the visual all the same, and it will be able to contour nest all the same as well. But of course, your cutter will care. So if I have this check, I can make sure that these things don't happen. I can prove that it doesn't have a closed path if I just drag it into the application and I open it up a bit. We can see that my contour here in the beak is actually open. So I was able to detect that. Okay, so that's a whole bunch of things about pre-flighting already. Now let me just open a few of the good files. Well, actually, I've only spoken about checks so far. More things you could do on the import also with the toolbox profiles is fix the files automatically. So if I have, for example, a file like this one, which doesn't have anything. So if I look at it, it doesn't have a contour line. Now I can add profiles that contain fix-ups as well. So what I could do is I can go find a profile that contains a fix-up. I would have to define a location for the temp files to be saved because Toolbox will generate a file where the fix-up is executed, and then Prime Center will reopen the new file into the images. So I say enable fix-up, and I define a path for that file to go. Then I can right-click, and I can say pre-flight. We get, oh, it's done it. The pre-flight is successful. I still have to click fix-up. So I'll click auto fix-up. And then we can see the new file is opened as well. So if I open up the original file, we can see this is a rectangular file. If I open up the file where I executed the fix-up, we can see this one now has a contour called cut contour, and I made that contour with rounded corners. So it has the contour and it also rounds off the corners of the label. And then if I want to, I can also still add bleed to this file. I could do that either within the Colors profile itself or with the bleeding option here in Prime Center. I can right click that file again, say bleeding, then it will execute whatever I have set as bleeding in the open recipe. Then I get a new file, and if I open this one as well, we can see in this one, we have a duplicate pixel bleed around that cut contour for those 5 millimeters I defined. So you can also fix files where you would expect problems. And what you can do is, because you can work with a profile, you can make a process plan, you can make that quite complex, and you can have that work for everything you expect to go into that certain recipe and fix all the stuff you want to fix automatically.
So one more question about this cut contour business. Will it catch a compound path in the cut contour?
Ooh, that's a good one. I haven't actually tried having a hole in the file.
Yeah, so you could actually, I think this one actually depends on what you want. In
Yeah.
Toolbox, you can detect stuff like that. So you could make a profile that detects all kinds of things in the cut contour. It really depends what you want. And sometimes a compound path depends on what you exactly mean by that. But a path that consists out of two parts might not be bad. If you want to make donuts, you will need two parts in it, or there will never be a hole in your donut. So you have to define what exactly is acceptable. But there is a range of pre-flight checks that you can put in one of those profiles that can detect things. For example, one that is very common with cut contours is checking whether the cut contour is at the top of the Z order, or detecting whether the cut contour is set to overprint, and there are a few other things like that. Most of those can be detected in PDF Toolbox.
You know what, I'm quickly going to have this file have a cut contour, which is with a hole in it. So let's see if it's able to catch that. I haven't actually tested that one.
But like I said, you might actually want that. Not in this penguin, I think.
No, not in this penguin, but if it should only give us the outsides, like the part with it between the cut lines. And I'm pretty sure it's able to do that, but I just haven't opened one of those files before. So that's easy enough to check. I have a new PDF.
But there again, it depends on how you made it in Illustrator, because you have multiple ways of doing that. To determine whether something is inside or outside. So I'm not sure your test is entirely conclusive.
Yeah, it's definitely going to work for the cut, because it's going to have that thing as a cut line. So on the cutter, this is not going to be a problem. But if it's it doesn't automatically trim the inside away, apparently, which could make it impossible for that hole to be used for nesting and adding other files inside it. So that would be more testing. I'll try to do that at some point, and then we'll have more information.
In PDF, you have these rules. So whether in a cut line or a line that is inside works as cutting out the inner parts of it. So, and then of course this is something you would have to set up in the PDF file or in Illustrator or InDesign to begin with, and then export it from there to PDF. And yeah, as David said, so you're able to check for all of that in PDF Toolbox. It really depends here what you want to find out.
Yeah, Andrea, the clarification you add, so sometimes it's a double cut line instead of a stroke. There are applications, I won't name names. There are applications who actually create a filled object, if you want, instead of a stroke so it visually would look the same, but it would not be a very good stroke to give to a cutter. That actually can be detected, because that would be a filled object. So you can make a pre-flight check that would give a warning on that as well. We've done a bunch of stuff like that in PDF Toolbox. If you have example files that you want to test, feel free and contact us afterwards.
Yeah. So beyond the whole pre-flighting thing that I went on quite a bit about right now, back to Prime Center, once we have our images loaded in correctly, and I know they're right, so I can pre-flight all 3 of these with my contour checks. So I can say pre-flight, and we'll see all 3 of these pass the pre-flight, so I don't really need to look at the reports because I know that they're all okay. Now I can add these to my sheet. Now the sheet is also predefined. So you can see here at the bottom, I have a tab called Pages. In the Pages, I have a media selected and I have a format selected. Both of these are drop-downs and they have a bunch of options. Again, these options can be set in the settings. So if we go to the settings, we have our media and our format. Now, Prime Center was developed by Caldera together with Zund, and they have a direct integration with Zund Cut Center. So if you have a Zund Cut Center and you have a bunch of media and formats that are defined in there, you can actually sync those. You can add your cutter via the network, and you can sync the settings from your Zund cutter to Prime Center and have that list of media and that list of formats here available. I just added a few formats because I don't have a Zund table. So I just added a few media and formats to my list for demo purposes. So I have this media called Dbond selected, and I have this format 1250 by 2500 selected. Of course, you can edit these here as well, and you have all the options available. Then there is the possibility of having with sheets or roles. If you work with roles, it will automatically change the length of the roll depending on your settings. So it will make it up to the nest. So you will never waste more paper than your nest is high. And you can also make it divide the nest into certain parts of a certain size, because you don't want to print a roll of 5.5 meters in one point. Maybe you want to print that in handleable segments of like 1.5 meters. And you can define that it will only fill up 1.5 meters at a time, but it will still create all the pages you want to print. I'm going to work with sheet for the demo, but roll works just as well. And you can also set margins. So I have all this selected. I'm okay with this. Now I can add my files. If I select one of these images, you see the images tab opens up, and I can get some metadata for my image. I know it's 250 millimeters wide and high. If I click this, I can toggle between percentile values. So I also know that this is 100% of its original size, and I can change that if I want to. I can make it bigger. I'm going to use the cut contour, so I leave this selected and I can add the quantity. So let's say I want about 200 of those penguins. Then, I can scroll to change that. Then I can add some metadata if I want to use this metadata, for example, for the annotations later, or for the ganging if I want to do ganging. So I can say, for example, the job ID for this file is 001 if I want to do that. Then I can say insert, and we'll see we get about 200 of these penguins inserted into the file. I can go for this one, do the same thing. So I'm okay with the sizes. I'll add about 150 of those. Job ID 002, insert, we get all of those. And maybe I'll add about 7 or 8 of these. Job ID 003, insert. And we get all of those. Now this looks like a huge mess. You're not gonna print this like this because you'll just print all your stuff on top of each other. The reason it does this is so it's able to know exactly what is on the file, on the sheet you want to nest, and then it can take into account everything when it's creating this optimized nest. If it doesn't know how many of each you want, it can't do that. Beyond that, having this layout, which is also available down here at the right bottom corner in the Layouts tab, allows you to, after you execute the recipe, do this process the same layout, so the same amount of files, but a different recipe and get a different result. So you don't have to re-enter all the files you want printed. Let's go through the rest of the recipe here. We can have it go to the cutter. Again, this is a Zund integration. So if I select my Zund, I am able to add marks for my Zund. I could add internal cut marks, so they're not extra margin on the outside of the file. And I can have it output directly to the hot folder for the Zund. I can also have it calculate an estimated cutting time for my total file. I don't have that, so I'm not going to activate this. we have the option to add a trim box around the file rectangularly if it doesn't have one. So I have both options selected. This isn't going to mess with this file because all of these have a cut contour. Then I can add the bleed. We already spoke about the bleed. If in a manual flow, I have to do that manually. So I have to select these and say bleed. Otherwise, it's not going to do it. So in this case, it's not going to do it, but my files don't really have bleed because my cut contour is around some white space. To add bleed, you have to select a contour to work from. So in this case, I have cut contour selected, and you have to select a size. Then we have the annotations. You can add a QR code or a barcode, which would contain the content you want to add to it. And you can also add a text information block where you can also define the width and height if you want to do that. You can add trim boxes, basically cut contours in specific spot colors to those annotations. So you know in your cutter which lines are for the annotations and which lines are for the artwork, and you can define where you want that contour to go. So in this case, I'm not going to do this, but I am going to define it as the bottom right. And then I can define what my annotation has to be. In this case, I have a text here. This is Dutch. Let me replace this with English. Print dates. And then I can define the date by using this date tag. And I can say job ID. And then I can add the job ID tag by clicking the drop down, selecting job ID, and I get this job ID tag. This tag is only available if I have for each of my images a job ID filled in, which in this case I have, so that's fine. Then I can go to the mirror. Mirror is if you want to print on the back side of a transparent material. You can do it horizontally or vertically. It's an option they also offer in Caldera RIP, and they offer it here as well. I'm not going to use it. And then we have the nesting. So I'm going to do true shape nesting. I can add margins if I want to. In this case, I don't have the bleed, so I don't really need the margins. And then I can define a rotation angle. This rotation angle is the intervals that Prime Center will take into account when it's checking for the most efficient nesting. The lower this number, the more variations of nests are possible, and the more efficient your nest can become. But the harder it is for Caldera to calculate all these different variations. So your computer might be having a little more trouble with it. I found that 5 degrees is actually quite nice in the nesting results. I did see the question from Carl. I'm going to answer that in a bit. It's something to do with the full automation. Nesting direction is how will it fill your sheet. So in this case with automated, if I have a portrait sheet, it will go left to right and then top to bottom. If I select either of the others, it's going to fill in that direction first. And the minimum fill ratio has to do with when it's going to skip to the next row. So in this case, it wants to fill 75% left to right before it goes to the next row of left to right files. Then we have a threshold. This is how long we allow it to wait before it starts nesting. So again, an automation option, not a manual option. We can tell it to wait for, let's say, 15 minutes before it takes the files from the hot folder and starts nesting them together. That way you're sure that it has a bunch of files, all files that came into the folder within the last 15 minutes. Or I can define a start time. Let's say you want to define a recipe that runs in the morning at around 8:30. So you have all your files from the whole night collected and into one nest. And you can tell it to start nesting at 8:30 in the morning and start preparing your files for you. That way all the files that came in via the web shop or whatever have been added to the same nest. Since you're not going to work at night anyway, that's a good way to make sure that all those files are present. Then we have an optimization time. I'm going to put this on no threshold for a second. The optimization time is a time we allow it to calculate different variations of the nest to pick the most efficient one. So the more time I give it, the more efficient my nest could be if it calculated a more efficient option within that time. I'll leave it at 10 seconds. That's actually not bad for this kind of file. I can make it higher, but then we have to wait longer, so I'm not going to do that. And we can have it gang files together. In this example, that's not interesting because all these files are in the same group, but I'm going to run an automated flow in a second, and you'll see how that works there. And then we have the output options. This is again something that has to do with the automated flow and not with the manual one. You have to allow it to export a PDF. Then you have some options on how you want to handle that PDF. So I would, for example, deselect that one. and then you have a location where those files have to go. You can also export an XML job ticket that includes some information about all the files you have on that layout. And you can define the output name, which is again using those jokers we saw. And here is the second PDF Toolbox profile. So we can add a profile, for example, that does a conversion to a default PDFX profile, or whatever variant on that you would like to use for your production. And then it can do that conversion and make sure that you have a standardized output file that is perfect for your workflow. Now, I'm working manually and I'm happy with the files I put on here and with the settings of my recipe. My recipe, of course, I would only have to make once because I'm going to use these same settings most of the time. So if I work with it for further, I would add files here, I would put those files on the nest, and I would just click apply to execute the recipe that I have made before. So I clicked it, we should see it calculating my nests in a second.
While you're waiting for that, Michiel, there was another question about cutting file options.
Yeah.
If customizable, are there different formats to choose from?
Yeah, so like I said before, the only cutter integration that is available within Prime Center integrated right now is the Zund Cut Center. So you can select that Zund table. If we go to the settings and we go to the cutters, you can connect that table either by hot folder or via the network. And it's going to create those ZCC files that you know for Zund Cut Center and send those directly to either the hot folder or the Zund controller over the network. That's all Prime Center can do right now. They're a bit vague on whether or not they're going to include more stuff. The same with the marks. Right now, it can only add the Zund marks. Of course, that doesn't really matter because if you don't have the Zund table, what you'll still get is your nested output file here, which you can then send to your RIP, and your RIP can create the correct cut file for you. So I have a Summa plotter here. I can create my Summa cut file on my RIP and then have that file work out, and that can use any cut format that I want it to have. In Caldera RIP, you can also have a normal DXF format for your cut file, which you can then use on basically anything. So those options are still available. So we can see it created 4 nests that are for my amount of files. We can see the first one says I need 2 copies of it, and we have 4 of the big penguins. I asked for 8 big penguins, so printing that one twice will give me those 8 big penguins. If I click this open, we can see exactly how many of each file are on this nest. Then I have 2 copies of this to basically create most of my round penguin logos, and I'll have another copy of this one and these leftovers. So this is one of the problems with the sheets that you won't have with the roles, is that in this case, to print this job, I'm going to have a lot of leftover space on one of my sheets. That's a bit of a shame if you're working with those plates. Of course, you can then use the rest of that plates for a different job down the line. There is an option in the export of the PDF that allows you to crop the PDF to data, which would cut off the rest of the sheets. Your PDF file that you're ripping is actually a bunch smaller. So that's an option that's available if you want to use it that way. Now, to have the file for this, what I would have to do is select it, then click export, and then I can define where I want to save this. So I'll say, fine, I'll save it there. And if I go to that folder, which I can do on my other screen, there we go. We'll see in a second, this file is going to be added here. There we go. It says, oh, that's done. I can click open to open it, or I can just find it here. And if we look at this file, it's just the PDF we expect. If we open this file in anything really, we will see that it has, so let's open it in Toolbox, for example. We can see that it has the artwork layer and the cut layer, and it also uses, if we look at the object inspector and we go to one of these lines, we will see that it has that cut contour separation as well. So it has both the spot color and the layer in the PDF, and that should be sufficient for really anything to interpret the files correctly. So that's basically the manual flow. And these big files, these big PDFs are really what it's supposed to export. That's all you're looking for. Now I can go for more automation. One way to do this is to use hot folders. So if I go to my semi-auto recipe, which is a different recipe with different settings that I can use besides the manual one I also have. I'm not limited to how many of these I can just open up. So I can have a semi-auto recipe running as well. I have a few different settings here to make the automated flow work better. I have an input hot folder set. I can define how I want these files to be handled if they are either loaded successfully or loaded not successfully. And I can't enter how many copies I want. Why is that? Because I'm actually using metadata from the file name for that. My file names here are defined in a way that it can take a gang name, a job ID, and the number of copies from the file name using these jokers. There is a bunch of jokers available right now. Basically, you can do copies, and you can do anything from the metadata tags you see here at the bottom left. So customer ID, order ID, job name, gang name, and comments. All of these can be taken from the file name based on, well, what's in there. This works like a regular expression, so you just have to define everything really nicely so it works with all your files. Then I can have a pre-flight profile that looks at that file. This basic science one is essentially looking at the cut contours. I can replace that with my own made contour checks. And there's no fix-ups in this one, so I don't have to enable that. And then the second automated part would be on the output. I would have to tell it export to PDF, where to send it to, and I also have an export pre-flight profile defined, which is the convert to PDFX4 profile, where fix-ups are enabled. So that's basically the difference between manual and auto. Now, there was a question about having an XML from an ERP system loaded in instead of doing this manually, and that is possible in the most expensive version. So if you have the Max version, which is the full automation version, you could just drop an XML file into that hot folder, the same hot folder I am now dropping my images in, and have that file read, which contains the locations of all the files you want and all of their metadata. And then those files can be taken from there, processed correctly, and your nested file would be output. So having a completely automated flow with an XML file is possible. The XML file would have to have the correct format, and that is predefined by Prime Center. So you would have to make sure that the XML file you're exporting is correct to work with this application. Now, if I click Start, I am basically starting my recipe. If you're thinking about it in toolbox terms, that would be starting your server job. So now it starts looking in that hot folder I defined. You'll see it finds files, and it's loading those files in over here at the left in the image bar. And it's also starting to pre-flight those. So if we look at our Finder again, I have a pre-flight report folder selected. And this is where all my pre-flight reports essentially for anything that comes into the application get dropped. So we'll see it should be something at the, oh, there they are. It's these top ones. So these are being checked with my contour checks profile. You can see the name of it, and you see no problems found. This could also be an XML report if you want to automate the checking of those reports. Now that they're pre-flighted, it started nesting, and you can see at the bottom it has begun creating layouts. So if we look at that, we'll see it also started grouping them. This is the ganging I talked about before. In my nesting tab, I have a ganging by gang name selected. And in my input tab, I am taking the gang name from the first part of the file name, which was the customer ID part. So I have two gangs. I have customer ID 1 and customer ID 2. And in each of these gangs, I have all the nests it created with the files to get the number of copies I wanted, which was in the file name. And it's going to give me the wanted output files based on all these settings. So I can look at this. I went a bit further with this. I have defined an output folder. So if we look at the Finder and we go to the semi-auto output folder, you'll see the ones that are done are also ready in my folder. And we can see them all here. So we have these three already there. I think another one should be coming in as soon as it's exported correctly. And you can see this one ends with a 3 in the file name. That's because in my output, I have defined the number of copies I need of these nests at the end of the file name. It tells me this one needs 3 copies to get the wanted number of tickers. So I have on that file name a 3, and whoever is supposed to process this knows that this 3 means I need to print this 3 times. I went beyond this, and I also set up my RIP correctly to look at that same folder. So if I open up my Caldera RIP and I open up my Caldera jobs, which is basically Caldera's spooler, I can look at one of these Nialas. I think it is this one. Let's just start it up and we'll see. And in this printer, we'll see that that output folder I defined in Prime Center. So basically this Prime Center demo location that I just had open in my Finder as well is defined as the input folder for my Caldera flow. So these files are loaded into Caldera and are sent to this Niala printer. And if we look at it, we'll see that these nests are already processed by my Niala printer and are already sent to the printer.
But this full automation you can only do when you have the highest version of Prime Center, yes?
Yes, because you can only export files if you have the most expensive version, the max version of Prime Center. Otherwise, what you'll have to do is go here to the bottom, select all the files. So I can just select multiple files here and then say export and export these files manually to wherever you need them to be to work with your RIP.
And just to make that very, very clear, this does not require, I know you said that in the beginning, but it does not require the Caldera RIP or anything else from Caldera, obviously. You could just as well have some other RIP that has an input folder and that picks up files automatically from the output folder from Prime Center, and it would work just as well.
Okay, so I think that's, does it require PDF Toolbox? No, it does not. The PDF Toolbox technology is actually embedded as OEM, so it works within Prime Center. If you want to make your own profiles, however,
Yes.
you will require a PDF Toolbox desktop because you can't make profiles within Prime Center. So you can use the profiles they give you, which is the conversion to PDFX, the verification for PDFX, and those basic signs that they have that check for spot colors. Those profiles are ready for you and you can use those with Prime Center itself. If
But
you want to have other profiles,
the license for the desktop is not included with Prime Center. That is the key.
Yeah, exactly. So you can either purchase a desktop license and create your own profiles, or you can have someone create profiles for you that match the requirements that you're looking for. Okay, so the most of the pre-flight stuff that I mentioned here had to do with fixing the cut contours. Of course, anything else you can do within Toolbox, you can do here as well. So I have, for example, a few profiles here that would scale images to a certain extent. For example, the back or the front of t-shirts. That works perfectly fine as well. You can use place content, you can create and apply shapes. All of these things that are typical CALAS things are perfectly doable within these pre-flight profiles. Then do the profiles have limitations?
Yeah, so recipes, I think, basically, I think, are there any limitations to file size of what will be created by Prime Center?
The limitation is what you set here. So I have my sheet and my role definitions in my pages, which I can define in my settings. And these files are created for your output device. It's important to take into account that the file you output from Prime Center is the file you will print. It is the dimensions of your printer. So anything that you will create your sizes there in accordance with that. If you have these sizes of plates, then you will have those sizes in Prime Center and it will output those files. If you have these widths of roles, it can create those widths of roles. The length of the roles, so the height of the files it creates for roles is infinite, but of course you're not going to print infinite. So you're going to have to set a limit there for either how long your roll is, which is probably 50 meters or something, or how long you want to handle at one time, which would be several meters before you slice it off and then use that as a separate file to take to the finishing department. So those are essentially your limits. If you're going for anything bigger, because there is of course a PDF size limit without scaling factor, that's something you have to take into account. We have had profiles running on large PDFs with both Toolbox and Pitstop. Yeah, so with PDF Toolbox, it wouldn't be a problem. It can take into account the scaling factors. It would handle any preflight that it needs to do completely fine. And so would Prime Center, by the way. If you open a file that has a scaling factor, it would open with the correct size within Prime Center. You just have to take into account that that size should not be much bigger than your sheet would be.
As does the Caldera RIP. It also will scale it up automatically if there is a scaling factor in there.
Yeah.
Does the scaling factor get put in by Print Center when it's creating something? Like we've been dealing with a customer says they want to have 600 inches as their length of their roll. They don't want to have small pieces.
Mhm.
And then if we run a profile on it afterwards, there's some funny things that happen in both programs if we want to try and do something after the fact, which we don't want to do anything after the fact, but the scaling factor needs to be turned on. Is it done in the Print Center?
I'm pretty sure that's done automatically. We could check that by just making a layout with a whole bunch of the big penguins and see how big the roll file is that it exports from that. So if I go to manual and I go to my layouts and create a new one, so I'll say create.
As far as that goes for PDF Toolbox, if you have PDF files with scaling factors or user units in it, then it should handle them completely correctly. If it doesn't, then I would consider that a bug.
Yeah. So, but there are no bugs. No, but yes.
There's only features.
But so that's an important point, Andrea. If you see something that you think is not handled correctly for a file with page scaling in PDF Toolbox, then please report it, because we would like to know about it, because I think it's a bug that needs to be fixed.
So I'm creating a layout with 600 of these big penguins.
600.
Yeah. So I have a maximum chunk length defined as 30 meters. I think this is right. Centimeter.
Yes.
Yes. So I have 30 meters chunk length. So it's the longest piece that's going to create is going to be 30 meters. So let's look at what it actually created for us.
I don't know by heart what the maximum size in PDF is. So
5.08 meters.
5.0. You know that by heart?
I do now. I've had some support questions.
Okay.
So the file it created here is 30 meters long. So it created a file with those penguins from 30 meters long. So if I export this, we would expect
in PDF Toolbox.
Yeah, we would expect a PDF file that has a scaling factor, because it wouldn't be possible to create a PDF file from 30 meters long.
Yeah.
So I exported the file. Let's look at one of my finders. In my manual output, there is the new file. And what did it do? It looks pretty long. Let's see if it opens correctly in Toolbox. And there it is. So it works perfectly fine. It made it 300 centimeters. Wait a minute. Yeah, scaling factor. So it's fine.
So 300 centimeter would be 30 meters as well.
It's 3 meters.
That's 3 meters, yeah.
3 meters, yes. So there should be.
Yeah, that could be. Actually, yeah. So we are improving this. In this version, it's just in the bottom line, it doesn't display user units now in the current version. However, the user units are there. If you would run a pre-flight check on it,
or look at,
you would see the user units. It's just so that they are not taken into account at the bottom line of PDF Toolbox Desktop.
Yeah.
You can say this is a bug, whatever. That was the case in Acrobat all the time, by the way. They changed it recently, and we are going to change that too.
Okay.
Yeah. So in Acrobat, it does show 30 meters. So the file is correct. It just contains a scaling factor, and Toolbox really proved that now by saying it's 3 meters. Yeah. So it's a scaling factor of 10 that it introduced the file.
Yeah,
so that's perfectly fine.
If you feel very geeky, you could look at it with Explorer PDF and actually see.
Oh, I don't dare to do that. I would lose my way immediately.
Oh.
Yeah, but you could even just run a profile, a check on it, and then in the page area where it's it displays a crop box, which is the size, and it also tells you that there is a user unit entry of 10.
Yeah.
So you have that information. It's just here. Yeah.
Yeah. So big files wouldn't be causing a problem. This would be just as we would expect it to be. So perfectly fine.
So there was another question we skipped because of all this big file stuff going on. Can you define object placement templates into a page?
Yeah, so if I make another new one, so I can right click here, you can see I'm keeping all my old layouts. So in case I want to redo this whole 300 big penguin thing, it's still available in my list here. So I can just create a new one. I can also name these so I can find them easier than having them called new layout 1, 2, and 3. So I have this new one created, empty sheet. If I take this penguin and I put this one onto my sheet just by dragging and dropping it, I can also add stuff like that instead of working with, I think it's getting a bit laggy because of all those penguins back there. So if I have this file selected on here, you can see in my images tab, I have the X and Y coordinates here. So I can influence those for the file. So if I put it all the way in the, is it the bottom right or the top right that I have to be? We can see what happens with these coordinates.
But what you can't do, I assume, is, and I think that the question, but you have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the question would be along those lines. What you cannot do, I think, here is create a template that says, I'm expecting 5 files and I want these files always to be in that and that and that particular location.
I think you can do that with the XML stuff because you can define the X and Y parameters that are in the media here in the images. You can define all these values in the XML that you want to have. So if you can say that you want this image to be loaded in at scale 100, XY coordinates, that and that, then you would be able to tell it to go a certain position, but you would be working with those files in that XML.
Yeah, but then you would have to basically do the calculations yourself and then write an XML file that does exactly that. And,
so it's pretty much writing an imposition scheme with an XML.
Yeah. Which is perhaps not the easiest way of doing that, but so I think the biggest value, I understand why people ask about templates. It's one of the questions that always comes up when we talk about IMP as well. But of course, the biggest value that you have here is the fact that it does this nesting thing, and it does it pretty efficiently. As you've seen, even with irregular shapes, I think is something that adds a lot of value to the processing you can do here. The time saving of this compared to doing everything manually in Illustrator must be significant.
This lemon is also one that nests really nicely. So if I add, let's say, 50 of these to the file, and I put this, yeah, I can leave it on roll really, maybe a smaller roll. So let's go for like a, that's not much smaller, is it? It's fine. Let's go for a really small roll. And I click apply on the true shape nest that we had. Oh, is my image insert? Oh, that's a lot bigger than I thought it was. I'll have to pick a bigger roll.
Your roll is not big enough for that.
It did give me an arrow for that, so I guess that's a good thing. So let's say apply. Okay, I guess I broke something by doing that. Let's take it all out. Yep, remove all of those. Re-enter it. This one should have a contour. Yeah, cut contour, so that's fine. Pages roll. Apply. And it should be giving us a nest soon. I'm adding this one because it's an irregular shape that actually nests quite well together in all kinds of small rotations. So there it is. Analyzing.
The value you set in on the recipe, the amount of time, that was in seconds, right? So you're giving it 10 seconds basically to
10 seconds to optimize, yeah.
Well, which in production you would probably set a little bit higher than that.
Yeah, I don't know exactly where the threshold lies between more time equals more efficient results. It's going to have a certain point where it doesn't just get any better than it has. So that depends on how good the calculating engine is that they created for that.
Well, it looks pretty fast at what it is doing anyway, so.
Okay, so we should be getting I am holding the penguins though, so it may be doing something penguin related. Yeah, it's taking quite a long time. I might just be re-nesting all the penguins. But anyway, any more questions would be appreciated to fill this awkward silence.
Because I said it was very fast. When will pricing be available, Michiel?
Oh, yeah, we have pricing.
Yeah, pricing is available, Alexander.
Yeah, we have pricing. Can I give the pricing, David? Am I allowed to give pricing? Yes. Or should we let them request that from orders?
I don't think it's very practical. So what I would suggest, Alexander, is that you just send us an email and we'll send you the information. That goes for anyone else as well, by the way. There is no secret about it. But so the pricing, if I remember correctly, the pricing structure that they thought of is a subscription, yearly subscription, correct?
Yeah, it's a yearly subscription. It gets a bit higher between the different levels of the sub. So the manual one is cheaper. Then you have the semi-auto, and then you have the pro. In the pro, you get 3 users. If you're familiar with the Caldera RIP licensing system, it's the same like it is there. So you have a license that you install on a licensing server that runs in the background on your system. That license is then shared automatically. Yeah, see, I did more penguins. It's my fault that it took so long. That license is shared over the local network. So any computer on that same local network can see that license is there and can use it. Now, the basic and the pro licenses, so the manual and the semi-auto one, have 1 user included in the license. That 1 user means you can have 1 interface like this one open at any time on that local network. The max license, so the more expensive one for the full automatic flow, can have 3 users. So with that one, you can have 3 of these interfaces open on the systems connected to that same license, and you can have 3 people actually working with the system at the same time. Users can be purchased separately. Again, on that yearly subsystem, you would pay a little bit more to that yearly sub for that extra user that you want to have.
Can I add something which is very important? I don't know where Alexander is located, Alexander Hyams, but in our distribution network, our territory officially at the moment for this product is the Benelux.
But you can still ask us.
Alex,
you can
always, Alex and I work together at TriBay in Canada.
Okay. Okay, but again, we are happy to give advice. We're happy to help you. We're happy to support you. We know a lot about Callas and Toolbox. We're the worldwide distributor of that product. But again, according to the agreement we have with Caldera today, we can only sell products of Caldera in the Benelux.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't contact us for questions, advice, consultation, etc. Welcome to do that.
Yeah, so this is basically a product introduction to show you what the application can do. It is available worldwide. We're just not selling it worldwide. We can assist, especially also with the Callas profiles. So neither Caldera nor Zund, who are working together on selling this application, have really a lot of specialty in PDF Toolbox. And we as 4Ps and also, of course, the people at Callas know perfectly well what we're doing with that application. So we can definitely assist you with pre-flight profiles, anything you want to do with those options on the input and the output profiles.
Yeah, in the case of Alexander, or Alex, If you work with Andrea, then you're in good hands there. So.
And be aware that Zunt is selling it, but not in a subscription model, but only as a perpetual license. So there's a commercial difference between the way Caldera is selling it today as a subscription model with 3 different modules, as Michiel just explained. And Zunt is doing it as a license, perpetual, with a yearly maintenance. But what we have experienced until now in the Benelux, maybe also in the UK, where we also have the right to sell it apparently, is that Zunt is not very interested to sell it as a standalone piece of software, but only to bundle it with a table.
Which kind of makes sense from their point of view, I guess.
Of course, but I just wanted to make that very specific.
Mm-hmm.
Now look at these beautiful lemons.
Yeah.
Nested perfectly.
Gorgeous. They are gorgeous.
If life gives you lemons,
Nest them.
Okay, any more questions? For once that we more or less kept to 1 hour. That seems like you've answered all questions from people, Michiel. Thank you very much for joining. It was a pleasure to see all of you.
All right, everybody, have a good day.
Have a great day, anyone. Bye-bye.